The art of political diplomacy has manifested itself in countless forms throughout history, but few rulers have mastered the delicate balance between personal charm, cultural spectacle, and strategic negotiation as effectively as Cleopatra VII Philopator, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Her reign, spanning from 51 to 30 BCE, coincided with one of the most tumultuous periods in Mediterranean history, as the Roman Republic expanded its influence and internal conflicts threatened the stability of the known world. In this complex political landscape, Cleopatra developed a sophisticated approach to international relations that transcended conventional diplomatic protocols, utilizing elaborate feasts and celebrations as instruments of statecraft that would determine the fate of her kingdom and, ultimately, the course of Western civilization. The Egyptian queen's strategic use of hospitality as a diplomatic tool was not merely a product of personal preference or cultural tradition, but rather a calculated response to the geopolitical realities of her time. Egypt, despite its immense wealth derived from the fertile Nile Delta and its position as a crucial trade hub connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe, found itself increasingly dependent on Roman goodwill for its continued independence. The Ptolemaic dynasty, of which Cleopatra was the final representative, had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries since the death of Alexander the Great. But by the 1st century BCE, their power had been significantly diminished by internal strife, economic challenges, and the growing dominance of Rome in Mediterranean affairs. Understanding that traditional military confrontation with Rome would be futile given Egypt's limited resources compared to the expanding republic's vast legions, Cleopatra recognized that her kingdom's survival depended on her ability to forge personal relationships with Rome's most powerful leaders. This realization led her to develop an approach to diplomacy that emphasized the creation of intimate, memorable experiences that would bind foreign dignitaries to her cause through a combination of sensual pleasure, intellectual stimulation, and the demonstration of Egypt's cultural sophistication and economic prosperity. The historical sources that document Cleopatra's diplomatic methods, while sometimes embellished by later Roman historians who had political motivations to portray the Egyptian queen in particular ways, nevertheless provide consistent testimony to her remarkable ability to create atmospheres of luxury and enchantment that served clear political purposes. Writers such as Plutarch, Appian, and Dio Cassius, despite their varying perspectives on Cleopatra's character and motivations, all acknowledge her exceptional skill in orchestrating elaborate entertainments that served as vehicles for serious political negotiations. The foundation of Cleopatra's approach rested on several key principles that would prove remarkably effective in the context of ancient Mediterranean politics. First, she understood that creating an environment of extraordinary luxury and sensual pleasure would distinguish her court from the austere, militaristic culture that characterized much of Roman public life. By offering experiences that were unavailable elsewhere, she could create a sense of dependency and desire that would motivate her guests to maintain favorable relationships with Egypt. Second, she recognized that the combination of intellectual discourse and physical comfort would appeal to the educated Roman elite, who prided themselves on their cultivation and sophistication, while simultaneously enjoying the fruits of their empire's expansion. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Cleopatra grasped the fundamental truth that political alliances in the ancient world were ultimately personal relationships between individuals, rather than abstract agreements between institutions. In an era when a single leader's favor could determine the fate of entire nations, the ability to forge intimate bonds with key decision-makers was often more valuable than military strength or economic leverage. Her feasts thus served as laboratories for relationship building, spaces where she could study the personalities, desires, and vulnerabilities of her guests while simultaneously demonstrating her own intelligence, charm, and worthiness as an ally. The cultural context in which these diplomatic entertainments took place was crucial to their effectiveness. Ancient Mediterranean society placed enormous importance on hospitality as both a social obligation and a marker of status and civilization. The concept of xenia, or guest friendship, was central to Greek culture and had been inherited by both the Roman and Ptolemaic traditions. To refuse hospitality or to provide inadequate entertainment for one's guests was considered a grave insult that could justify retaliation, while exceptional hospitality created bonds of obligation and gratitude that could last for generations. Cleopatra's Egyptian heritage provided her with additional advantages in this regard, as Egypt had long been renowned throughout the ancient world for its wealth, mystery, and exotic appeal. The kingdom's association with ancient wisdom, magnificent architecture, and mysterious religious practices created a sense of fascination among foreign visitors that the queen could exploit for diplomatic purposes. By presenting herself as the living embodiment of Egypt's grandeur and by surrounding her guests with symbols of her kingdom's power and sophistication, she could create lasting impressions that would influence their future political decisions. The logistics of organizing such elaborate diplomatic entertainments required careful planning and substantial resources. Cleopatra's court included specialists in various forms of entertainment, from musicians and dancers to philosophers and poets, who could provide intellectual stimulation and cultural enrichment for her guests. The preparation of exotic foods and rare wines from across the known world required extensive trade networks and considerable expense, while the creation of appropriate settings for these gatherings often involved the construction or modification of palaces and other venues to create the desired atmosphere of luxury and wonder. The queen's personal involvement in these preparations was crucial to their success. Unlike many rulers who delegated such responsibilities to subordinates, Cleopatra appears to have taken an active role in designing and orchestrating her diplomatic entertainments, understanding that her personal attention to detail would be noticed and appreciated by her guests. This hands-on approach also allowed her to tailor each event to the specific interests and preferences of her intended targets, maximizing the psychological impact of the experience and increasing the likelihood of achieving her political objectives. The effectiveness of this approach was demonstrated repeatedly throughout Cleopatra's reign, as she successfully navigated the complex and dangerous world of late Republican Roman politics through a series of carefully orchestrated relationships with key figures. Her ability to adapt her methods to different personalities and circumstances, while maintaining the consistent theme of Egyptian sophistication and abundance, suggests a level of strategic thinking and tactical flexibility that places her among history's most skilled diplomatic practitioners. The most famous and well-documented example of Cleopatra's use of seductive feasting as a diplomatic tool was her initial encounter with Mark Antony in 41 BCE, an event that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the Mediterranean world and demonstrate the queen's mastery of theatrical diplomacy. Following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE and the subsequent civil wars that divided the Roman world, Antony had emerged as one of the three most powerful men in Rome, controlling the eastern provinces of the empire as part of the Second Triumvirate. His summons for Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus was ostensibly to answer charges that she had supported his enemies. But both parties understood that this encounter would determine Egypt's future relationship with Rome's Eastern Command. Cleopatra's response to this summons revealed the sophistication of her diplomatic strategy and her understanding of Roman psychology. Rather than arriving as a supplicant seeking mercy, she chose to present herself as an equal partner worthy of respect and alliance. The elaborate preparations for her journey to Tarsus began months in advance, involving the construction of a magnificent barge that would serve as both transportation and stage for her first impression on Antony. Ancient sources describe this vessel as a floating palace, decorated with gold and silver, propelled by oars of silver to the sound of flutes and lyres, while the queen herself reclined under a canopy of gold cloth, dressed as the goddess Aphrodite, and attended by servants costumed as cupids and sea nymphs. This theatrical presentation served multiple strategic purposes. By identifying herself with Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, Cleopatra was not merely displaying vanity, but making a sophisticated political statement about the nature of the relationship she sought to establish with Antony. In the Hellenistic tradition, rulers were often associated with particular deities, and by choosing Aphrodite, she was signaling her intention to combine political alliance with personal attraction, understanding that Antony's personality and history suggested he would respond favorably to such an approach. The journey along the Cydnus River to Tarsus became a carefully orchestrated spectacle that demonstrated Egypt's wealth and cultural sophistication, while simultaneously creating an atmosphere of mystery and anticipation. Reports of the magnificent procession spread throughout the region, ensuring that Antony would hear detailed accounts of the queen's approach long before her actual arrival. This preliminary phase of the diplomatic encounter was crucial, as it established Cleopatra's reputation for magnificence and created expectations that would influence the psychological dynamics of their subsequent interactions. Upon reaching Tarsus, Cleopatra extended an invitation for Antony to dine aboard her barge, a gesture that transformed the power dynamic of their meeting by positioning herself as the host rather than the accused party. The feast that followed became legendary in ancient literature, described by Plutarch as an event of unprecedented luxury and sensual appeal. The dining pavilion was illuminated by countless lamps arranged in patterns that created stunning visual effects, while the air was perfumed with exotic incenses that enhanced the otherworldly atmosphere of the occasion. The menu itself represented a careful balance of exotic appeal and practical diplomacy. Egyptian delicacies that would be unfamiliar to Roman palates were served alongside dishes that would appeal to Antony's tastes, while rare wines from across the Mediterranean demonstrated both Egypt's trading relationships and its commitment to providing the finest possible hospitality. The service was performed by attendants chosen for their beauty and grace, creating an atmosphere of sensual pleasure that complemented the intellectual discourse that formed the substance of the diplomatic negotiations. Throughout the evening, Cleopatra demonstrated her command of multiple languages and her knowledge of Roman history and culture, engaging Antony in conversations that revealed her intelligence and political sophistication while simultaneously appealing to his ego and ambitions. Her ability to shift seamlessly between serious political discussion and playful entertainment created a unique dynamic that differentiated this diplomatic encounter from the formal, protocol-bound meetings that typically characterized ancient international relations. The success of this initial feast was measured not merely by its immediate impact on Antony, though contemporary sources suggest that he was indeed thoroughly enchanted by the experience, but by its establishment of a pattern of interaction that would define their relationship for the next decade. The combination of political partnership and personal intimacy that began with this carefully orchestrated encounter would ultimately reshape the balance of power in the Roman world and demonstrate the effectiveness of Cleopatra's approach to international relations. Following the success at Tarsus, Cleopatra continued to refine and expand her use of diplomatic entertainment throughout her relationship with Antony. Their subsequent meetings in Alexandria provided her with even greater opportunities to showcase Egypt's cultural and economic resources, as she could utilize the full apparatus of her court to create experiences that would reinforce Antony's commitment to their alliance. The banquets and celebrations that marked his visits to Egypt became increasingly elaborate, incorporating elements of Egyptian religious ceremony, Greek intellectual tradition, and Roman political symbolism in ways that appealed to different aspects of his personality and ambitions. One particularly significant example was the series of feasts that accompanied Antony's preparation for his campaign against the Parthian Empire. Cleopatra used these occasions not merely to provide entertainment and relaxation for her ally, but to actively participate in the strategic planning of the campaign while simultaneously demonstrating Egypt's potential contribution to the endeavor. The discussions that took place during these gatherings combined military strategy with diplomatic negotiation, as Cleopatra offered both financial support and political alliance in exchange for guarantees regarding Egypt's future status within Antony's expanding sphere of influence. The integration of political substance with sensual pleasure during these events reflected Cleopatra's sophisticated understanding of human psychology and her recognition that decisions made in atmospheres of comfort and enjoyment were more likely to favor her interests than those reached in formal, adversarial settings. By creating environments where her guests felt relaxed and appreciated, She could guide conversations toward outcomes that served Egyptian interests while maintaining the appearance of generous hospitality rather than calculated manipulation. The queen's ability to adapt her entertaining style to different guests and occasions demonstrated her tactical flexibility and political intelligence. When hosting Roman senators and officials, she emphasized Egypt's role as a stable and prosperous ally that could contribute to Roman interests, while her entertainments for Antony increasingly focused on their shared vision of an Eastern Empire that would rival Rome itself in power and magnificence. This differentiated approach required detailed knowledge of her guests' personalities, ambitions, and political positions, suggesting that Cleopatra maintained an extensive intelligence network that informed her diplomatic strategy. The cumulative effect of these repeated diplomatic entertainments was to create a web of personal relationships and political obligations that served Egyptian interests even as the broader geopolitical situation became increasingly complex and dangerous. Through her mastery of the art of seductive feasting, Cleopatra had transformed herself from a relatively powerless client ruler into a major player in Mediterranean politics, capable of influencing the decisions of Rome's most powerful leaders through a combination of charm, intelligence, and strategic generosity. The ultimate test of Cleopatra's diplomatic methods came during the final years of her reign, as the relationship between Mark Antony and Octavian deteriorated into open warfare that would determine the future of the Roman world. During this period, the queen's use of elaborate entertainments evolved from tools of alliance building into instruments of war preparation and propaganda, demonstrating the adaptability of her approach to diplomacy even under the most challenging circumstances. As tensions escalated between the eastern and western portions of the Roman world, Cleopatra recognized that her previous success in forging personal relationships with individual Roman leaders would not be sufficient to protect Egypt from the existential threat posed by Octavian's growing power and ambition. The series of feasts and celebrations that she organized during this period thus served multiple purposes, maintaining Antony's commitment to their alliance, demonstrating Egypt's continued wealth and stability to potential supporters, and creating a sense of unity and purpose among the diverse coalition of forces that opposed Octavian's bid for sole power in Rome. The donations of Alexandria's ceremony in 34 BCE represented the culmination of Cleopatra's use of spectacular public entertainment for political purposes. This elaborate event, which combined elements of traditional Egyptian coronation ceremonies with Roman triumph celebrations, was designed to proclaim the establishment of a new Eastern Empire that would unite Egypt with Rome's eastern territories under the joint rule of Antony and Cleopatra. The careful choreography of this event, from the costume choices that emphasized both rulers' divine associations to the formal distribution of territories among their children, demonstrated Cleopatra's understanding of the symbolic dimensions of political power and her skill in creating memorable spectacles that would influence public opinion throughout the Mediterranean world. The feasts and celebrations that accompanied the donation ceremony were particularly significant because they served not only to entertain guests, but to communicate a clear political message about the legitimacy and permanence of the new Eastern Empire. By demonstrating Egypt's ability to host events of unprecedented magnificence, Cleopatra was making a statement about her kingdom's resources and her own fitness to rule alongside Antony. The presence of delegates from various Eastern kingdoms and cities at these celebrations also served to legitimize the new political arrangement and demonstrate the broad support that the Eastern Empire enjoyed among local populations. However, the very success of these events also contributed to their ultimate failure, as reports of the elaborate celebrations in Alexandria provided Octavian with powerful propaganda weapons in his campaign to portray Antony as a traitor to Roman values who had been seduced by foreign luxury and corruption. The Roman public's reaction to accounts of the donation ceremony and its accompanying festivities revealed the limitations of Cleopatra's diplomatic approach when applied to audiences that were not directly present to experience her charisma and intelligence firsthand. The final phase of Cleopatra's career demonstrated both the strengths and weaknesses of her reliance on personal diplomacy and spectacular entertainment as tools of statecraft. While her methods had proven remarkably effective in building and maintaining relationships with individual Roman leaders, they were less successful in influencing broader public opinion or encountering systematic propaganda campaigns that portrayed her as a threat to Roman values and interests. Nevertheless, even during the final stages of her conflict with Octavian, Cleopatra continued to use diplomatic entertainment as a tool for advancing Egyptian interests. The negotiations that preceded the Battle of Actium involved a series of meetings and communications in which both sides attempted to win over uncommitted Roman commanders and Eastern rulers, and Cleopatra's reputation for magnificent hospitality played a role in these efforts to build coalitions and secure alliances. The legacy of Cleopatra's approach to diplomacy extends far beyond her immediate historical context, offering insights into the relationship between personal charisma and political power that remain relevant to contemporary international relations. Her recognition that successful diplomacy often depends as much on psychological and emotional factors as on material interests anticipated modern understanding of the role of soft power in international affairs. While her skill in creating memorable experiences that would influence her guests' future decisions demonstrated the importance of symbolic and ceremonial elements in political communication. The historical record of Cleopatra's diplomatic methods also reveals the complex relationship between gender and power in the ancient world. Her success in using traditionally feminine attributes, such as beauty and charm, for political purposes challenged conventional assumptions about women's roles in international relations. While her ability to combine intellectual sophistication with sensual appeal created a unique form of diplomatic authority that was both effective and controversial. The ultimate failure of Cleopatra's political project should not obscure the remarkable success of her diplomatic methods within their intended scope. Her ability to forge and maintain powerful alliances through personal relationships and spectacular entertainment enabled Egypt to maintain its independence for nearly 2 decades longer than would otherwise have been possible. While her influence on Roman politics during this period was far greater than that of most contemporary rulers who possessed superior military and economic resources. The enduring fascination with Cleopatra's methods of diplomacy reflects not only the dramatic circumstances of her life and death, but also the universal human recognition that political relationships are fundamentally personal relationships, and that the ability to create positive emotional experiences can be as important as military strength or economic leverage in determining the outcomes of international conflicts. Her mastery of the art of seductive feasting as a diplomatic tool thus represents not merely a historical curiosity, but a sophisticated understanding of human nature and political psychology that continues to offer insights into the dynamics of power and influence in human societies. In conclusion, Cleopatra's use of elaborate feasts and entertainments as instruments of diplomacy represents one of history's most sophisticated examples of what would now be termed cultural diplomacy or soft power projection. Through her careful orchestration of sensual pleasure, intellectual stimulation, and political symbolism, she created a unique approach to international relations that maximized Egypt's limited military resources while exploiting her personal advantages in charm, intelligence, and cultural sophistication. While the ultimate failure of her political project demonstrated the limitations of this approach when confronted with systematic military and propaganda campaigns, the temporary success of her methods in maintaining Egyptian independence and influencing Roman politics provides valuable insights into the role of personal relationships and memorable experiences in shaping the course of international affairs.